Right now, grocery store shelves across America are quietly shrinking, and most people haven't noticed yet. A retail research firm recently projected that close to 8,000 grocery and retail locations could close across the United States in 2026 alone. At the same time, only about 5,500 new stores are expected to open their doors. That gap tells you something important. This isn't a temporary blip in the data. The overall direction is pointing toward long-term decline, and it has been building for a while. But here's what most people miss when they hear statistics like that. Around 30 million Americans already live in what are classified as food deserts, areas where the nearest full-service grocery store sits 10 to 20 miles away. That's not a future possibility. That's happening right now. And yet even that statistic isn't the most pressing thing worth your attention. What deserves more focus is something subtler and closer to home. It's what's changing inside the stores that are still open. Over the past several months, visits were made to grocery stores across multiple states. Not casual shopping trips, but deliberate, repeated visits designed to track exactly what was consistently in stock, what was beginning to thin out, and what had quietly disappeared. And a clear pattern started to emerge. Certain foods aren't vanishing all at once. They're fading. One week the shelves look full. The next, there are gaps. Then a handwritten out-of-stock sign appears, and eventually even that sign is gone, because nobody expects a restock anymore. Most shoppers walk right past without registering what's changed, but a smaller, quieter group of people has started to pick up on it. They're not panicking. They're not clearing shelves in a frenzy. They're simply adding a few extra essential items each shopping trip, week after week, building a steady buffer while food is still accessible and prices are still manageable. By the time this video is done, you'll know which 9 foods are becoming harder to reliably find, understand why it's happening in practical terms, and have a simple, low-stress framework for what to do about it. The real question is whether you'll use that information or file it away and forget about it. Let's get into it. First up, canned butter. And honestly, until about 2 months before this was researched, canned butter wasn't even on the radar as something you could buy at a standard retail store. It had come up occasionally in conversations about old-fashioned food preservation or homesteading traditions, but it always seemed like a niche product, the kind of thing you'd only find in specialty preparedness shops or buried in obscure corners of the internet. That assumption held right up until one specific visit to a local farm supply store. A woman, likely in her mid-70s, was working her way methodically through the shelf where the canned butter was stocked. Can by can, she was loading them into her cart with calm, practiced efficiency. By the time she finished, she had taken every single can on the shelf, roughly 18 in total. What stood out wasn't urgency or anxiety. She wasn't moving fast. There was no tension in her expression. She carried herself with the calm of someone following a routine they'd done dozens of times before. After a brief conversation, she explained that her family had lived through the Great Depression. Her grandmother always said butter was among the first things to disappear from store shelves when conditions got hard, and among the very last to come back. She wasn't predicting a crisis, she was simply honoring a habit passed down through her family, staying a step ahead while it was still easy to do so. After that conversation, it seemed worth digging into how canned butter is actually produced and distributed in the United States. The findings were more striking than expected. At this point, only 3 companies in the entire country are producing genuine canned butter, meaning real dairy butter sealed for long-term shelf-stable storage. Just 3 suppliers covering an entire nation. And recently, 2 of those 3 have hit significant obstacles. One company suffered a fire at one of its production facilities, meaningfully slowing its output. The other isn't dealing with a butter problem specifically, but something more fundamental, a shortage of the metal cans used for packaging. Without the cans, the butter doesn't ship. When supply tightens at exactly the same time demand is climbing, the outcome tends to follow a predictable path. And that path leads to empty shelves. People who understand the dynamic are paying attention now, before it becomes obvious to everyone. From a practical standpoint, canned butter stored in cool conditions typically maintains its quality for anywhere between 5 and 10 years. A standard stick of refrigerator butter, by comparison, starts degrading after 3 to 4 weeks. Even freezing it only buys so much time. After around 6 months in the freezer, flavor loss and texture changes become noticeable. 1 can of shelf-stable butter generally equals about 3 standard sticks. When you're thinking about what to keep on hand for the months ahead, that shelf life fundamentally changes the math. Second, evaporated milk in pull-tab cans. This one didn't jump out immediately. It took roughly 2 months of consistent store monitoring before the pattern became undeniable, which is itself a sign of how gradual these changes have been unfolding. 6 different grocery stores were visited repeatedly over a 3-month window. Each visit involved checking which products were fully stocked, which were running low, and which had disappeared. Around the 2-month mark, small gaps started appearing in the section where pull-tab evaporated milk is usually displayed. At first, just a few cans missing here and there. Then shelves that were only half filled. Then entire sections completely bare, marked only by out-of-stock tags. The pull-tab lid might seem like a minor detail. It isn't. In situations involving extended power outages, emergency evacuations, or any kind of disruption to daily routine, being able to open a can without a separate tool matters more than it sounds. You don't realize how much it matters until you're managing a multi-day outage and discover there's no can opener to be found anywhere in the house. But even setting aside that practical point, evaporated milk is one of the most undervalued shelf-stable items you can store. It's real dairy milk with much of the water content removed, which means it takes up significantly less space than liquid milk. Add water back in and it functions like regular milk. Use it as is, and it works beautifully in cooking and baking. To test it properly, 2 full weeks were spent using evaporated milk as a complete substitute for fresh milk across every household use. Coffee, cereal, mashed potatoes, pasta sauces, baked goods. Nobody in the household noticed the substitution. The mashed potatoes actually came out richer and creamier than the usual version. Nutritionally, it's more concentrated than people expect. Because much of the water has been removed, the protein and calcium per serving are higher. A single cup delivers roughly 16 grams of protein, which makes it a meaningful nutritional contribution rather than just a filler ingredient. A distribution manager with over 3 decades in the dairy industry shared an off-the-record perspective that adds important context. When dairy production comes under pressure, shelf-stable products get deprioritized. Fresh milk and cheese carry higher profit margins, so factories allocate their resources toward those first. When staffing issues, equipment problems, or lower production capacity hit, it's the lower-margin shelf-stable products like evaporated milk that get produced less and shipped in smaller quantities. That's not just a temporary disruption, it's a structural issue that gradually drains shelf stock over time. Third, canned tomato paste. It sounds almost too ordinary to mention, but this one carries some of the most important context on the list, because the reason tomatoes are becoming harder to reliably stock connects to broader agricultural and climate trends that aren't going away. California produces a significant share of the processed tomatoes used in American canned goods. And in recent seasons, California's tomato-growing regions have faced consecutive years of drought, heat stress, and reduced yields. Fewer tomatoes harvested means less available for processing. Less available for processing means canned goods like paste, diced tomatoes, and crushed tomatoes have become harder to produce in consistent volumes. Pair that with rising transportation and packaging costs, and you have the conditions for steady, gradual shortage. From a pantry standpoint, tomato paste is one of the most versatile items you can store. A few tablespoons can anchor an entire meal. It forms the base of soups, stews, chilies, pasta sauces, and casseroles. It adds depth and body to dishes that would otherwise taste flat, calorie-dense relative to its size, easy to integrate into almost any cuisine, long shelf life. It checks nearly every box. Have you thought about how many meals in your home rely on some form of tomato product? For most households, the answer is more than they'd initially estimate. Fourth, dry, whole milk powder. This one often gets dismissed as something for camping trips or emergency bunkers, not for everyday households. That perception is worth challenging. Dry milk powder is real whole milk with the water fully removed. Nothing exotic about it. When you mix it with water in the right ratio, it reconstitutes into something functionally identical to the milk you'd pour from a jug. The taste difference is minimal when used cold or incorporated into cooking. The shelf life, however, is dramatically different. Properly sealed and stored in a cool, stable environment, dry whole milk powder can remain usable for up to 25 years. That's not a typo, 25 years. Now consider what's been happening in dairy supply chains. Between fuel and transportation cost increases, labor shortages at processing plants, and the same structural issues mentioned with evaporated milk, dry milk powder production has been inconsistent. On several consecutive store visits, the section where powdered milk is normally stocked had empty pegs or was entirely absent. The nutritional profile is also worth noting. It contains everything you'd expect from whole milk, calcium, protein, fat-soluble vitamins, and usable calories. For households with young children, elderly family members, or anyone with higher nutritional needs, having a reliable long-term dairy source matters. Think about what happens if fresh milk becomes unreliable for even 2 or 3 weeks. How would that affect your household? This is the kind of question worth sitting with for a moment before moving on. Fifth, canned salmon and tuna in large multi-packs. Individual cans of these products are still relatively easy to find. The multi-packs, the 6-count and 8-count boxes that offer better value and longer planning horizons, have been thinning out on shelves noticeably over recent months. The reasons behind this are layered. Wild salmon fishing is governed by strict catch quotas that fluctuate based on population surveys and environmental assessments. In several recent seasons, quotas have been reduced to protect fish populations under growing ecological pressure. Tuna faces parallel challenges, with multiple species under international fishing restrictions and global demand continuing to outpace sustainable supply. What this means practically is that the price per can has been climbing steadily, and the multi-packs, which canneries often produce and ship in fewer quantities because they take more warehouse space to store, are being stocked less consistently. Canned salmon and tuna deserve attention beyond just protein content. Both provide omega-3 fatty acids in meaningful quantities. Omega-3s are linked to cardiovascular health, brain function, joint support, and inflammation management. These aren't minor benefits. They're functions your body relies on daily. And for households trying to maintain nutritional quality while managing a food budget, canned fatty fish represent one of the best calorie per dollar options available. What's worth understanding is that when these multi-packs disappear from shelves, the replacement isn't always a better option. It's often just a smaller can at a higher per unit price. Sixth, white rice in 25 and 50-pound bags. The 5-pound bag of rice sitting on the grocery shelf looks stable. The large format bags, the kind that represent real bulk storage value, tell a different story. Over the past 2 years, rice prices globally have climbed sharply. Major rice exporting nations, including India, have implemented export restrictions in response to domestic supply concerns and poor harvests. The ripple effect has been felt in American distribution networks, where large format rice bags have become less consistently available and their prices have risen significantly when they do appear. Rice is one of the foundational long-term storage foods for a reason. Stored properly in sealed containers in a cool, dry location, white rice can remain stable for up to 30 years. It provides quick energy through complex carbohydrates, is affordable relative to its caloric value, and pairs with virtually any protein or vegetable you have available. It's the definition of a versatile staple. The challenge is that most households treat rice as something to buy when needed rather than something to maintain a supply of. That mindset works fine when supply is predictable. It becomes a problem when it isn't. And right now, the signals from global rice markets suggest that predictability is not guaranteed going forward. If you're thinking about building any kind of food buffer, large format rice bags are one of the highest leverage places to start. Buy them when they're available, store them correctly, rotate them into your regular cooking. 7th, sardines and mackerel. These two are easy to overlook, mostly because they sit at the unfashionable end of the canned fish aisle. But from a nutritional and storage standpoint, they belong near the top of any serious list. A commitment was made to eat sardines twice a week for a full month, simply to understand them better from a practical standpoint. The first can was genuinely difficult. The smell, the texture, the oiliness, none of it was inviting. But something shifted around the third or fourth time. By the end of the month, sardines had become a routine part of meals without any reluctance. And noticeable changes came with that shift. Mental clarity felt sharper. Energy levels during the day felt more consistent and sustained. The most likely explanation is the significant increase in omega-3 intake from eating fatty fish regularly. Now here's where the supply concern becomes real. Sardine and mackerel fisheries around the world are under mounting pressure from a combination of overfishing and changing ocean conditions. Several significant fisheries have already reduced their catch limits. The pricing data reflects that pressure clearly. 3 years ago, a quality can of sardines cost around $2. Today, that same can typically runs $4 or higher, and it isn't always easy to find even at that price. On multiple recent store visits, shelves that should have been stocked with sardines were either mostly empty or completely cleared out. 100% price increase over 3 years combined with declining availability isn't a temporary fluctuation. It's a trend with momentum behind it. For storage purposes, sardines and mackerel packed in olive oil offer the best nutritional profile. The oil adds usable calories and enhances the overall value of each can. Most cans carry a shelf life of 3 to 5 years, making them a genuinely reliable long-term source of both protein and essential fat. No refrigeration required, no preparation needed beyond opening the can. 8th, cooking oil in large containers. 2 years ago, a gallon jug of vegetable or canola oil cost roughly $6 at most grocery stores. That same jug now runs closer to $13. That's more than double in approximately 24 months. But price isn't the only thing that's changed. Availability has also become unreliable. On multiple occasions over a 3-month monitoring period, visits to several grocery stores specifically for gallon-sized cooking oil containers came up empty. The shelves were bare. The causes are global and interconnected. Ukraine was previously one of the world's largest sunflower oil exporters. The ongoing conflict there has severely disrupted that supply. Palm oil production is being curtailed by both environmental regulations and adverse weather in key producing regions. Soybean oil pricing has climbed in parallel with broader grain market increases. None of these pressures are expected to ease quickly. Here's the part that often gets overlooked in conversations about food storage. Dietary fat is not optional. Your body cannot function properly without it. The most commonly stored staples, rice, dried beans, canned vegetables, grains, contain very little fat on their own. Relying on them exclusively without an adequate fat source can lead to serious health problems within weeks. Low energy, cognitive fog, hormonal disruption, immune system weakness. These are real consequences of fat deficiency, not distant theoretical risks. Cooking oil addresses that gap directly. 1 tablespoon contains roughly 120 calories of pure fat. Adding a few tablespoons to a meal of rice and beans transforms it from something that merely fills your stomach into something that actually sustains you. Storage management matters with oil. Most vegetable oils last 1 to 2 years unopened in a cool, dark location. Once opened, they break down faster. Rancid oil doesn't just taste unpleasant, it can cause digestive issues. A workable rotation system involves keeping about a year's worth stored and replacing the oldest container every couple of months as it gets used in regular cooking. Coconut oil is worth considering as a secondary fat source. Its higher saturated fat content makes it more chemically stable over time, and it can last 2 to 3 years or longer in proper storage conditions. 9th, honey in large jars. This one earns its place at the end of the list because it's genuinely unlike anything else here. Honey is one of the only foods on Earth that doesn't spoil. Not in the conventional sense. Archaeologists have discovered honey sealed in ancient Egyptian burial chambers, some of it more than 3,000 years old, that was still chemically intact and technically edible. That's not marketing language. It's chemistry. Honey's extremely low moisture content, naturally acidic pH level, and its capacity to generate trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide create an environment that's deeply hostile to bacteria and microbial growth. From a storage perspective, honey is nearly impossible to ruin if it's kept sealed and dry. It might crystallize over time, but gentle warming brings it back to liquid form without damaging it. It won't freeze in a typical home environment. It won't expire. It doesn't spoil the way virtually every other food does. That kind of stability is almost without parallel in anything you can eat. So what's the concern? Large format honey containers, the multi-pound jars and 5-pound tubs that make practical sense for long-term storage, have been appearing less consistently on store shelves. Smaller jars remain widely available, but the bulk sizes that offer the best value per ounce and the most efficient use of storage space have become harder to find reliably. Part of what's driving this is the continued decline in domestic bee populations connected to colony collapse problems that have reduced honey production across the country. Stricter oversight of imported honey products has also tightened the international supply side. Both factors are applying pressure to availability at the same time. And honey's usefulness goes beyond sweetening food. It has documented antibacterial properties. It can be used to support minor wound care. It helps soothe coughs and sore throats. It delivers fast-releasing energy when needed. In situations where medical resources aren't immediately available, a well-stocked jar of honey functions as a surprisingly capable, basic first aid resource. When large jars appear in stock, it generally makes sense to pick up more than you initially planned. The cost per ounce is better at larger sizes. The storage efficiency is better. And unlike almost any other food you could buy today, honey essentially holds its value indefinitely. Which brings us to the bigger picture. None of what's been described here is drawn from worst-case forecasts, online speculation, or fringe thinking. It comes from direct, repeated observation of real store shelves across multiple states over an extended period of time. The patterns are real. They're documented, and they've been consistent. You don't need to overhaul your household all at once. You don't need to make stressful bulk purchases or change how you live. The most practical approach is steady, incremental, and sustainable. On your next few grocery trips, simply add 1 or 2 of these items to your cart. Not a dramatic stockpile, just a small, consistent addition each time you shop. Over several months, that naturally builds into a real, usable food buffer that you've assembled without stress, without rush, and without spending beyond your normal budget. Timing matters here because most people aren't thinking about this yet. The households that are best positioned months from now will be the ones that started while things still felt normal, not the ones who waited until the empty shelves were impossible to ignore. When store employees tell you they don't know when a product will be restocked, that's not a throwaway comment. It usually reflects real strain somewhere in the supply or distribution chain. Pay attention to those moments. They're telling you something. If this gave you useful perspective, take a second to give this video a like and share it with someone who might benefit from hearing it. This is my channel, and the goal here is always to give you practical, grounded information you can actually use. Start this week. Pick 2 items from this list. Keep it simple. Keep it consistent. That's how you take care of your household.